Welcome to the deep dive. We're jumping into a really interesting document today. It's titled 007love.pdf.
Right. And it's not quite what you might expect from the title, maybe. It's more of a guide, really.
Exactly, yeah. It lays out this specific framework for spiritual teaching. Focuses a lot on love and introduces Jesus in a very actionable role, I'd say.
That's a good way to put it, actionable, because it moves pretty quickly from these big spiritual ideas, love and God, into really practical, step-by-step stuff for discipleship, for leading small groups.
Yeah, it feels like it's designed for you to just pick it up and use it immediately.
For learning and then doing.
So, okay, our mission for this deep dive is basically to unpack this document. We want to pull out the core teachings it's presenting. How does it define love? Where does it say love comes from?
And that big one, the most important commandment, it tackles that head on.
It does. And then there's this model it proposes for worship and for group life. So we'll look at the insights, the examples it uses, the logic, trying to make it all clear for you, the listener.
And it starts right away, doesn't it? Posing that question. If you're going to teach someone about God, what's the absolute first thing you need to tell them?
Yeah, that question really frames everything that follows. It points straight to what this document sees as, the most fundamental thing.
The non-negotiable starting point.
Okay, so let's dive into that starting point. It kicks off by introducing Jesus in a really specific way. It uses that picture from Mark chapter 6, verse 34.
Right, where Jesus sees the crowds and feels compassion.
Yeah.
Because they seemed lost, like sheep without a shepherd.
Exactly. And because he felt that, the scripture says, he began to teach them. That's the key link the document makes.
And the core idea it pulls from that is pretty clear. Jesus is the good shepherd, the ultimate one.
But then it takes it a step further. It says, okay, if you follow Jesus, you're called to be a shepherd too, in a sense.
Stepping into that role for others.
So if that's the call, what does this guide actually say a shepherd does? It breaks it down, uses Psalm 23, which is familiar to many.
Yeah, 3 key actions from that psalm. A shepherd leads their sheep, gets them on the right path.
Okay.
They protect their sheep, keep them safe.
Protect.
Then they feed their sheep, provide nourishment.
Lead, protect, feed. Okay? And the document connects this directly to how believers should act.
Exactly. It translates it like this. Lead people to Jesus. Protect people from evil or harmful influences, and feed people with God's word.
Makes sense. It's very direct.
And it even suggests, these little hand motions to help remember concepts. For shepherd, it suggests moving your hands towards your body like you're gathering people in.
Interesting. So very visual, very practical from the start.
Right.
Okay, so building on that foundation, Jesus as shepherd, our call to shepherd today goes right back to that first question. What's the number one thing to teach?
And it points straight to Mark chapter 12. Verses 28 to 31, where that teacher of the law asks Jesus point blank, what's the most important commandment?
Right. And Jesus' answer, which this guide really highlights, has 2 parts. The first is,
Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. That's the first part.
And the second, just as crucial according to this document,
is this. Love your neighbor as yourself.
And the conclusion is emphatic, isn't it? Jesus says, and the guide repeats, there is no commandment greater than these. This is presented as the absolute core.
The bedrock. And true to form, it includes hand motions for these 2. Simple ones.
Let me guess.
For love God, it's hands reaching up towards God.
Okay.
And for love people, hands reaching outwards towards others, making it easy to remember and teach.
Keeps it simple and memorable. Okay, so if these commands are central, the next logical question is, well, where does this love actually come from? How do we do this?
Exactly. And for that, the document points to 1 John chapter 4, verses 7 and 8.
Which is this?
Basically, that love is from God, that everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God.
Yeah.
And the flip side, the one who doesn't love doesn't know God because...
Well, because God is love. So the conclusion is pretty straightforward then.
Absolutely. Love comes from God. That's the source.
And it describes a kind of flow.
Yeah, it talks about it like this. We receive love from God, and then we give love back to him. That's one circuit.
Okay. Receiving and giving back to God.
And then we also receive love from God, and we give that love out to other people.
So it flows from God to us And then both back to God and out to others.
Precisely. And again, there are hand motions to visualize this. Hands up to receive from God,
Okay.
then hands up again, sort of offering it back to God.
Okay.
And forgiving to others, hands up to receive first, then hands spreading outwards to give away what you've received. It really tries to make these abstract ideas tangible.
It does. So you've got this foundation. Jesus the shepherd, the core, commands to love God and others, and knowing that love originates with God. This all sets the stage for a practical framework the document calls simple worship.
That's right. And it's presented specifically as a way to live out, to practice, that first great commandment from Mark 12:30, loving God with everything.
With all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Right. So this simple worship structure has 4 parts, and each one is tied back to one of those aspects.
Exactly. It's very neat. First is praise. And they connect praise to loving God with all your heart.
Okay. Heart leads to praise.
Amazing.
Makes sense. How does that look in practice?
Well, the suggestion is things like singing together choruses, hymns, or having someone specifically pray for God's presence and blessing on the time together. Simple acts of worship.
In the hand motion.
Hand over your heart, then
Mhm.
raising hands up in praise, connects the feeling and the action.
Okay. Praise is heart. What's next?
Next is prayer. This is linked to loving God with all your soul.
Soul connects to prayer.
Okay.
And the suggested action.
Here it suggests pairing people up, having them share prayer requests, specifically mentioning praying for people they know who are lost, who need to find faith, and also praying for the training groups themselves, potential leaders, and then the partners pray together.
Very focused prayer.
Yeah.
And the motion.
It's kind of clutching hands to your sides, maybe signifying the depth of the soul, and then moving them into that classic hands together prayer pose.
Okay. Heart praise, soul prayer. Third.
Third is study. This is tied to loving God with all your mind. Because we love God with our minds, we engage with His Word.
Mind drives study. What does study involve here?
2 things, mainly. Reviewing lessons that have already been taught in this training system.
The reinforcement aspect.
Exactly. And then learning new material, digging into Scripture together.
Got it. Hand motion for study.
Hand to the side of the head like you're thinking, then palms open and upward like reading a book.
Thinking and receiving from the word.
Yeah.
Okay, that leaves the last one. Strength.
Right. Practice. Linked to loving God with all your strength. The idea is because we love God with our strength, we don't just learn, we do. We put it into action.
Strength means practice. What kind of practice?
Specifically, sharing what you've learned with others. And actually practicing teaching the lesson to someone else, often right there in the group.
So it's not just personal application, but passing it on.
Very much so. The hand motion is flexing your biceps, showing strength, then opening your hand out like you're scattering seeds, sharing what you have.
Flex and sew.
Yeah.
Okay. And you mentioned this document really emphasizes these hand motions.
Oh, definitely. It seems core to their method. Learn it, see it, do it, remember it.
Yeah, that study section you mentioned, it involves reviewing previous lessons. How does that work?
Yeah, the document describes it pretty clearly. It involves actually standing up and reciting the key points from earlier lessons, often using those hand motions that go with them. It's active recall.
And it mentions specific review topics.
It does. It gives examples like asking, what are 8 pictures that help us follow Jesus? And it lists them. Soldier, seeker, shepherd, which we talked about, sower, son, saint, servant, and steward. These seem to be identity concepts taught earlier.
So reinforcing previous frameworks.
Yeah.
What else?
There's also a set of questions focused on this idea of multiply. Things like, what are 3 things a steward does? Probably referring back to that steward picture.
Okay.
And bigger questions like, what was God's first command to man? Presumably referring to be fruitful and multiply. And what was Jesus's last command? Likely the Great Commission. Then how can I be fruitful and multiply? Bringing it to personal application.
Very focused on reproduction, spiritually speaking.
Yes. And there's even an analogy question about the 2 seas in Israel, the Sea of Galilee, and the Dead Sea, asking why they're different.
Okay.
One takes in and gives out, the other just takes in, and asking which one do you want to be like? Pushing towards generosity and outflow.
Interesting review tools.
Yeah.
Okay, let's circle back to the practice element of simple worship. How specific does it get about how you practice teaching?
Oh, very specific. It says learners should pair up and practice teaching the lesson they just received. And the instruction is crucial. Teach it exactly as it was taught to you.
Exactly.
Including asking the same questions, reading the same scriptures together, and even answering the questions in the same way, following the model they just experienced. It's about faithful replication.
Wow, that's quite prescriptive.
It seems designed for rapid and consistent multiplication. And there's another step, too.
What's that?
Learners are told explicitly to think about and write down the name of at least one person outside the training group that they plan to share this specific lesson with.
So it's immediately outward focused, not just practice for practice's sake.
Right. It builds in accountability for sharing it beyond the group.
This emphasis on groups. How does the document define a group? How many people do you need for this simple worship?
It bases it on Matthew 18:20, where 2 or 3 come together in my name, there am I with them. So the minimum is just 2 or 3 people. It keeps the bar very low for starting.
Very accessible. And in the training itself, how do they practice this simple worship format?
The document describes setting up practice sessions. They might divide the learners into small groups, say groups of 4. They even have them name their group, giving it an identity.
Okay, small named groups. Then what?
Then, each person in that small group takes a turn leading one part of the simple worship sequence. One person leads praise, one leads prayer, one leads the study section.
Which might involve telling a Bible story.
Yes, often the study leader tells a relevant story. The document suggests the prodigal son as an example when talking about God's love. And the 4th person leads the practice section.
And are there specific instructions for how they lead these parts in practice?
A few key ones. They're told to lead softly, probably so the different small groups don't disturb each other in the same room.
Makes sense.
And the person leading practice, after the story is told, is instructed to ask 3 specific application questions about that story.
Always the same 3 questions.
It seems so for consistency. They are. What does this story tell us about God? What does this story tell us about people? And how will this story help me follow Jesus?
God, people, application. Simple, repeatable.
Exactly. That seems to be the goal.
This whole structure, small groups, practicing leadership, emphasis on multiplication, it really leads into this illustration the document uses, doesn't it? The one you mentioned, finding compelling. The sheep and tigers thing.
Yes, it's quite a vivid illustration, and its purpose is very clear. To show why they believe multiplying disciple groups and leaders is so crucial. It's not just a nice idea, it's presented as essential.
So how does it work? It's like a game.
Yeah, it's set up as a simple game, played out physically. First round, you have one person designated as the guard, representing, say, a single pastor or leader.
Okay, one guard.
Then you have maybe 3 people who are tigers. They represent, well, spiritual danger, opposition, Satan, as the text later implies.
One guard, 3 tigers.
And
everyone else?
Everyone else is a sheep, just regular members. The rules are basic. Tigers try to tag the sheep. If a sheep gets tagged, they're hurt. They have to crouch down.
And the guard?
The guard tries to protect the sheep, maybe by blocking the tigers. But the guard is vulnerable too. If 2 tigers manage to tag the guard at the same time, the guard is out.
Okay, so one guard, multiple threats, lots of vulnerable sheep. What usually happens in this first round?
Typically, it's overwhelming for the single guard. They can't be everywhere at once. The tigers can easily pick off sheep, and often the guard gets taken out too. The result is usually a lot of hurt sheep.
Right, I can picture that. Then they play it again.
Yes, round 2. Same number of sheep, same 3 tigers. But here's the crucial change. They add more guards. Maybe 5 additional guards, so now you have 6 guards in total.
6 guards, 3 tigers. Big difference in ratio.
Huge difference. And there's another instruction. The sheep are told to gather in small clusters, huddling near the guards. Not just one big flock, but several smaller groups around their specific protectors.
Okay, small groups, multiple guards. How does round 2 usually end?
Dramatically differently. The tigers find it much harder to get to the sheep because they're protected within these smaller groups. And the tigers themselves are now outnumbered by the guards. Often, the tigers get captured or eliminated very quickly by the coordinated guards.
And far fewer sheep get hurt, presumably.
Exactly. Maybe none, or very few. The contrast between round 1 and round 2 is stark.
So what's the takeaway picture the document draws from this game?
It draws a direct analogy. The first game, with one overwhelmed guard, is presented as being like one pastor trying to protect a whole large church that's maybe focused only on getting bigger. It leaves individuals vulnerable. It's easy for Satan, the tigers, to cause harm.
Okay, that's the negative picture.
The second game, with multiple guards and small protected groups, is the positive model. It's like having several spiritual leaders, maybe small group leaders, each caring for their specific group. In that setup, the document argues Satan and his forces find it much harder to hurt people.
So it's an argument for distributed leadership and small group structure as a form of spiritual protection.
Precisely. And it connects this right back to Jesus as the Good Shepherd, the one who laid down his life. The call, then, is for believers to become shepherds in spirit.
Meaning?
Meaning being willing to give your life, and it clarifies this means your time, your prayer, your focus, your energy for the sake of those who are learning about Jesus, who need that care and guidance.
But it also acknowledges a limitation, right?
Yes, a crucial one. Unlike Jesus, who is God and omnipresent, we're human. We can only effectively care for, be present for, a limited number of people at any one time. We can't be everywhere for everyone.
We don't scale infinitely.
Exactly. And that, the document emphasizes, is the fundamental reason why this model pushes so hard on teaching others to teach others. It's about multiplying the number of shepherds.
So there are more people available to provide that care, to bear those burdens.
Right, to fulfill what Paul calls the law of Christ by bearing one another's burdens. It's a strategy born out of a realistic understanding of human capacity and the scale of the need.
That illustration really lands the point, doesn't it? It makes the why behind the multiplication strategy very visual and visceral.
It does. It moves it from an abstract concept to something you can almost feel.
So alongside all this teaching and practice, there's also an element of memorization involved, like we saw with the review questions. Does it include a specific memory verse for this section on love and shepherding?
Yes, there's a key memory verse highlighted. John chapter 13, verses 34 and 35.
Which says,
Jesus is speaking. So now I am giving you a new commandment. Love each other. Just as I have loved you, you should love each other. Your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples.
So tying love for each other directly to being his disciples and making it a witness to the world, that fits perfectly.
Absolutely. It summarizes that outward-facing love command. And again, there's a specific method for practicing it.
How do they practice the memory verse?
It suggests standing up and saying the verse aloud together as a group 10 times.
10 times.
Yeah. The first 6 times, you can read it from your notes or Bible, but the last 4 times, the goal is to say it from memory. And each time, before quoting the verse, you say the reference. John 13.34-35, reinforcing where it comes from.
Repetition, active recall, saying it aloud, very focused on embedding it.
It seems to be a consistent methodology throughout. Make it simple, make it memorable, make it repeatable, practice it actively.
So let's try and wrap this up. Looking back at this deep dive into Duro7love.pdf, we've seen it lay out a really specific, reproducible model, all centered on this concept of love.
Right. It defines love through those greatest commandments, loving God, loving neighbor. It traces the source of that love back to God himself because God is love.
And then it gives that very practical 4-part framework: simple worship, praise, prayer, study, practice, as a way to actually live out that love.
Connecting each part explicitly back to loving God with heart, soul, mind, and strength. It's a neat package.
And then there's that powerful illustration, the sheep and tigers game.
Yeah, making that strong case for why multiplying these small groups, led by people acting as shepherds in spirit, isn't just, a good idea, but essential for protecting and caring for people as they learn to follow Jesus.
It feels like all the pieces are designed to connect. Simple worship is the engine for living the command to love.
And multiplying groups using that engine creates the network of care, the shepherds on the ground, needed to protect the sheep, just like in the second round of the game.
It's clear this document isn't just about passively receiving information. It's a call to action.
A very direct one. It's not just saying be loved by the shepherd. It's saying step up, become a shepherd yourself, and actively work to multiply that care for others. It's quite demanding, really.
Which leads us to a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. This document presents a very active call. What does it practically look like in your own life to embody that shepherd spirit it describes?
Yeah, how do you actually give your life, your time, your focus, your prayers for people around you who might need that kind of spiritual guidance or care?
And maybe more specifically, considering the strong emphasis here on multiplication, on teaching others to teach others, how could you apply that core idea? How could you help multiply care, knowledge, or leadership within your own sphere of influence, whatever that looks like for you?